What if humans were never meant to be the first witnesses, only the last to remember? Traveller beneath the heat-soaked plains of southern Iraq, a single clay tablet lies buried, its symbols pressed by hands, 5,000 years ago, waiting in silence like a footprint trapped in ancient ash. You did not arrive here by accident. Some questions find us only when the world grows quiet enough to hear them. What if those earlier Sumerian records were not myths at all, but notes left behind after something else had already passed through history? Cuneiform appears fully formed around 3200 BC, a complete system, without a childhood, as if knowledge arrived rather than evolved. Imagine that certainty as a faint light flickering once beneath the sand, then vanishing. Stay with me, listener. Let's drift a little deeper and follow the silence together. Before sunrise, the land holds its breath. A thin veil of dust rests over broken stone, and the horizon glows faintly as if remembering a light it once knew. In places like this, time feels layered rather than linear, each moment resting gently on top of another. I have stood in such silence after long nights of study, when instruments were powered down and only the quiet remained, and I learned that some questions do not come from curiosity alone. They arrive when the world itself is ready to be heard. Tonight the universe whispers again. Not with urgency, not with fear, but with patience. You did not arrive at this question by accident, traveller. Something older than intention draws attention towards certain patterns, the way gravity draws dust into slow spirals. What if the first written words of civilization were not declarations of beginning, but traces of remembrance? What if writing itself emerged as a response to loss? Imagine clay still warm from the sun, shaped by hands that knew the river's rhythm. A scribe kneels not inventing symbols, but pressing memory into matter. The earliest tablets do not celebrate discovery. They speak as though something had already ended, as if civilization itself were a recovery, not an origin. In their silence, the tablets suggest that humanity did not step into an empty world, but into one already shaped, already scarred. As a scientist, I was taught to trust sequences. Simple tools precede complex ones. Rough shelters precede cities. Error precedes refinement. But the Sumerian record unsettles that comfort. Their mathematics arrives complete. Their cities rise with deliberate geometry. Their writing appears fully structured without visible rehearsal. It is as if the learning phase happened somewhere else sometime before. I've spent nights tracing star paths across paper maps, watching patterns repeat with mechanical grace. Orbits do not improvise. They remember. Gravity is memory expressed as motion, and light is ancient intelligence travelling without concern for who receives it. When I look at Sumer through that lens, I see a civilization that behaves less like an invention and more like an inheritance. The language itself resists placement. Sumerian has no clear ancestors, no linguistic parents to guide it gently into being. It stands alone, complete and unaccompanied, like a signal whose source is no longer transmitting. Archaeology prefers gradualism, but here the layers compress. The expected build-up is missing, replaced by sudden coherence. Erosion, which is time-thinking, slowly seems to have skipped a step. The tablets carry weight beyond their clay. Fired earth remembers pressure long after flesh dissolves. Radiation fades, light disperses. But clay holds shape, holding intention the way stone holds heat. And what these tablets remember is unsettling. They do not begin with humans ruling humans. They begin with others named and described with administrative precision, not poetic distance. Beings who descended, beings who emerged, beings who taught. Not metaphors carefully framed, but presences recorded alongside grain counts and temple inventories. The scribes do not explain who they are. They assume familiarity. Memory does not pause to define itself. It simply continues trusting that someone someday will remember enough to understand. When I first read those lines alone under lamplight, I felt something I had no equation for. Not fear, not belief, a quiet displacement. As though a familiar story had been rotated slightly, just enough to reveal an edge I had never noticed. Science does not collapse when confronted with mystery. It grows quieter, more attentive. What are the odds that a civilization would appear fully formed, carrying knowledge of astronomy, geometry and timekeeping, without visible developmental scaffolding. In planetary science, we calculate probabilities relentlessly. 1 in 10,000 alignments. 1 in a million impacts. But here the anomaly is cultural, not cosmic, and it sits patiently in the dirt, waiting. The Sumerians measured the heavens with a system that still structures our hours and angles. Base 60 is not intuitive. It is efficient. It is elegant. It is the kind of system someone designs when precision matters more than convenience. And it appears without ancestry, without trial versions preserved in the record. Knowledge seems to arrive already tempered. Dust settles differently on inherited things. Ruins feel quieter when they were never truly abandoned, only passed on. In the floodplains, layers of silt separate worlds like punctuation marks. Beneath them lie foundations that do not quite belong to the people who built above them. Architecture remembers hands even when names fade. I think of gravity again, how it does not forget mass once encountered. Civilizations too curve around what came before them even when they deny it. The Sumerians did not deny, they acknowledged. Again and again they wrote of a time before of teachers and rulers whose reigns stretch beyond human scale. Not allegory, but record. You're not lost in space, listener. You are part of it. Part of a long observation stretching backward through nights, without electricity, through eyes, trained on stars for reasons we no longer remember. When the Sumerians looked upward, they did not see novelty. They saw inheritance, patterns already measured, cycles already named. In my own work, I learned to accept uncertainty as a companion. Data rarely answers everything. Sometimes it opens a door and steps aside. The Sumerian record does the same. It does not demand belief. It invites attention. It asks whether humanity's first act of writing might have been an act of preservation, not creation. There is a tenderness in that idea, that the earlier scribes felt responsibility toward memory, toward what the flood had erased, that they pressed symbols into clay not to glorify themselves, but to keep something from vanishing entirely. Writing as resistance against forgetting. Civilization as a caretaker of ruins. Some mysteries are loud wrapped in spectacle. Others are quiet, embedded in routine. This one waits patiently in museum drawers and buried courtyards in signs that point backward rather than forward. It does not rush. It does not need to convince. Silence is the universe thinking, and this silence has endured for millennia. So we begin here, traveller, without conclusions and without fear. We begin with attention, with the acceptance that understanding is not always the goal. Some truths are not destinations, but companions along the way. Tonight the universe whispers again, and it is enough to listen. In the end, it is all right to not understand. Some mysteries wait, others watch, and as the night deepens, we take the first slow step into a story that may not belong to us alone. Morning light reveals what darkness conceals, but it also flattens wonder. That is why I prefer the hours before dawn, when instruments hum softly, and dusk still remembers the night. Evidence feels different then, less like proof, more like a presence, the kind that does not announce itself but waits to be noticed. In the case of the Sumerians, the evidence does not shout. It accumulates quietly, layer by layer, like sediment settling after a flood. Clay tablets are ordinary objects easily dismissed as administrative debris. Receipts, lists, records of grain and labour. Yet when examined closely, they carry an unexpected density. They speak of time measured with confidence of stars tracked across generations of systems that assume continuity far older than the hands that pressed the signs. The earliest tablets do not experiment, they proceed. They behave as though the framework already existed. Archaeology teaches patience. You learn to read absence as carefully as presence. At many sites, the story of development is clear rough tools, then refined ones, scattered dwellings, then planned spaces. But in southern Mesopotamia, the curve bends strangely. Cities such as Uruk and Eridu emerge with geometry already resolved. Streets align. Temples orient towards celestial points. Irrigation networks appear not as trials, but as solutions. I remember tracing site maps late into the night, fingers smudged with graphite, noticing how canals extend with quiet confidence across floodplains that resist control even today. Water is stubborn. It demands experience. Managing it requires memory, not guesswork. Yet the earliest systems show none of the hesitation expected from first attempts. It is as if the land had been practiced on before. Beneath these cities lie deeper layers separated by bands of water-laid clay. Flood deposits are not subtle. They arrive as punctuation ending one chapter cleanly before another begins. Above them, Sumerian culture flourishes. Below them, something else lingers. Old foundations, different construction techniques, tool marks that do not align with later methods. Evidence does not accuse, it simply waits. At Eridu, temples descend through 17 distinct phases, each one resting on the ruins of the last. The deepest levels reach back thousands of years beyond the accepted rise of Sumer. By the time excavators reached virgin soil, they found not emptiness but intention. The first temples already know where to face. They already understand proportion. There is no rehearsal visible in stone. Evidence also hides in numbers. The Sumerian base 60 system structures time itself, hours, minutes, degrees. It is not intuitive to the human body. We count in tens because we have 10 fingers. 60 belongs to the circle, not the hand. It is a system optimized for dividing space and tracking cycles. Astronomy prefers it. Geometry demands it. And yet it appears in Sumer without ancestry. I once calculated how long it takes to recognize certain planetary cycles without inherited data, decades at minimum, centuries more realistically. Venus does not reveal her pattern quickly. The Sumerians recorded it anyway with precision that aligns uncannily with modern calculations. The tablets themselves admit they are copies preserving measurements from earlier observers. Evidence again does not insist, it reminds. Art too carries evidence when words hesitate. Cylinder seals depict figures that do not change over millennia, bird-headed beings, fish-scaled forms, winged figures holding tools associated with measurement and construction. These images do not drift stylistically the way mythological art usually does. They remain anatomically consistent as though the reference never changed. When humans wear masks in art, the seam is shown. The disguise is acknowledged, but these figures have no seams, their forms integrate. Muscles attach where muscles should. Wings articulate at plausible joints. Scales follow functional patterns. Artists invested effort in accuracy, not exaggeration. Memory, when preserved, resists embellishment. Administrative texts mention offerings made to beings who dwell in the deep supplies accounted for with the same care as rations for workers, bread, textiles, crafted goods. These are not symbolic gifts, they imply physical need. Evidence does not explain why this mattered. It only records that it did. Flood stories appear everywhere in Mesopotamian literature, but their role is often misunderstood. They are not framed as moral tales alone. They are boundaries, before and after. The flood is the line that divides kinds of time. Before, it rulers reign for spans that do not fit human biology. After it rains, shorten abruptly. The shift is not gradual, it is categorical. Geology supports disruption. The river systems of the Tigris and Euphrates are volatile, prone to catastrophic flooding when climate oscillates. Ice melt monsoon shifts tectonic adjustments. These are not gentle processes. They erase landscapes efficiently. Evidence of repeated flooding appears across multiple sites, though not always simultaneously. The texts, however, speak of a single ending. Memory compresses events the way gravity compresses matter. Evidence accumulates not as certainty but as pressure. Each detail alone can be explained away. Symbolism, exaggeration, coincidence. But taken together, they curve interpretation towards something heavier. A possibility that knowledge was inherited, that architecture was restored, that astronomy was remembered, that writing began not as innovation but as preservation. I think of radiation again, how it carries information across emptiness without intention. The cosmic microwave background still whispers about a universe long cooled. Evidence persists even when context is gone. The Sumerian record feels similar. A background signal from a world that no longer exists detectable, only if one stops trying to make it familiar. Late at night, when fatigue softens certainty, I find peace in letting evidence remain unresolved. Science does not demand closure at all costs. It tolerates open questions. It respects silence. Some mysteries are not errors waiting correction. They are features of a deeper landscape. You are not meant to solve this tonight, traveller. Only to notice how evidence behaves when it points backward instead of forward. How ruins act like echoes. How dust becomes leftover chronology. How gravity holds on to what once mattered. In the end, it is all right to not understand. Evidence does not vanish because we pause. It waits. Some mysteries wait. Others watch. And as the night settles again, the universe grows quieter, thinking slowly leaving us just enough light to continue observing without needing to conclude. An anomaly is not a contradiction. It is a pause in understanding a place where expectation loosens its grip and something unfamiliar is allowed to stand. In the quiet hours when the mind stops demanding symmetry, anomalies feel less like threats and more like invitations. The Sumerian record is full of such invitations, gentle disruptions in the story we thought we knew. I remember the first time I noticed it clearly, not as a theory, but as a sensation. I was reading a translation late at night, the room lit only by a desk lamp, and the faint glow of instruments still warm from use. The text moved smoothly, administrative, precise until it did not. It spoke of rulers who reigned for tens of thousands of years, not metaphorically, not poetically, simply as fact. The language did not change tone, that was the anomaly. In most traditions, myth announces itself. It raises its voice signals distance from the ordinary. But here the impossible is written in the same breath as the mundane. A king ruled for 28,000 years. Grain was stored. A temple was built. There is no warning to the reader, no symbolic framing. The anomaly is embedded quiet, and therefore harder to dismiss. Biology resists such spans. Human cells accumulate error, telomeres shorten, entropy asserts itself patiently. For a reign to last millennia, something must be different. Either time itself behaved differently, or the beings described were not human in the way we are. The anomaly does not specify which. It only repeats. The same pattern appears in descriptions of the teachers. The 7 sages emerge from the deep, teach, then depart. They are not born, they are not killed. They arrive and leave like phenomena rather than organisms. Yet they are described with physical detail, scales, limbs, tools held in hands. They occupy space. They perform work, anomaly again suspended between categories. In science, anomalies often precede paradigm shifts. Mercury's orbit refused to behave until relativity reframed gravity. Cosmic background radiation lingered as noise until it became the echo of creation. Anomalies persist not because they are wrong, but because the framework around them is incomplete. The Sumerian anomalies feel similar. They do not ask for belief. They ask for patience. Art reinforces the unease. Across centuries, the same figures appear with disciplined consistency. Not exaggerated, not abstracted. Their proportions remain stable, their roles unchanged. They bless crops. They measure land. They guard thresholds. Human figures remain smaller positioned, differently excluded from certain actions. The scale is intentional. The anomaly is visual. Why would a civilization invest so much effort in preserving forms that were never meant to exist? Mythology tends to drift to absorb local colour to evolve. But these forms do not evolve. They persist like reference diagrams copied carefully to avoid error. Memory behaves that way when accuracy matters. The anomaly deepens when silence appears. After the flood layers, references to these beings diminish sharply, not gradually, abruptly. They move from present tense to past, from participants to ancestors, from teachers to names invoked. This is not how ideas fade. It is how populations disappear. Extinction leaves gaps that culture struggles to articulate. Language circles absence cautiously. The Sumerians do not dramatize the loss. They acknowledge it. They rebuild. They restore temples according to ancient measurements. They copy star catalogues from earlier observers. The anomaly shifts from presence to inheritance. I have seen similar patterns in other fields. In astrophysics, when a star goes supernova, it enriches surrounding space with elements heavier than hydrogen. Later generations of stars form from that debris, carrying traces of something no longer visible. Humanity in the Sumerian telling feels like a second-generation structure built from material and knowledge left behind. The creation stories reinforce this impression. Humans are made not as the pinnacle but as replacements, a solution to a labour problem. Clay mixed with blood, earth combined with something older. The language is procedural, almost clinical. Trial and error is implied. Some forms fail, adjustments are made, anomaly again, creation as engineering rather than miracle. This is not how mythology usually comforts. It does not elevate humanity. It situates us. It frames us as functional, not central, as successors, not originators. The anomaly challenges not just history but identity. If we were not first, then primacy becomes survival rather than destiny. When anomalies accumulate, the mind seeks escape routes. Symbolism, allegory, projection. These are useful tools, but they do not always fit. Symbols rarely require such consistent anatomical precision. Allegories do not usually anchor themselves in administrative records. Projection fades with time, but these details remain fixed. Late at night, listening to the steady hum of equipment, I find calm in admitting what does not fit. Silence is the universe thinking, and anomalies are the pauses where thought deepens. We are trained to resolve tension quickly. But sleep teaches a different rhythm. Let the question remain open. Let it breathe. You are not lost in Space Observer. You're moving through it, slowly carried by gravity you do not need to control. Anomalies do not demand resolution tonight. They only ask to be held gently like fragile instruments waiting for calibration. Somewhere beyond our reach, something ancient still moves, not necessarily in form but in influence. Patterns repeat. Knowledge transfers. Worlds reset. The anomaly is not that others may have existed before us. The anomaly is how calmly that possibility sits in the record waiting. In the end, traveller, it is all right to not understand. Anomalies are not failures of knowledge, they are reminders of scale. Some mysteries wait, others watch. And as your thoughts slow, allow this one to remain unresolved, a quiet presence drifting beside you as sleep draws nearer. Silence is not emptiness. It is structure without annotation, meaning without explanation. In the long work of science, silence often appears where continuity should be, where expectation prepares for detail and finds nothing instead. The Sumerian record carries such silences with unusual weight. They are not random gaps. They feel placed as though something once occupied them and then withdrew. After the flood layers, the tone of the text changes, not dramatically, quietly. References that were once immediate become distant. Beings who acted now linger only as names. Teachers who walked now dwell in memory. The language shifts into reverence, not familiarity. Silence settles where presence once stood, and the transition is too abrupt to feel accidental. I have learned through long nights of analysis that absence is a form of data. In signal processing, a sudden drop tells you something happened. In astronomy, a star that vanishes without debris suggests collapse rather than explosion. Silence has shape. It curves interpretation as surely as mass curves space. The Sumerians did not explain the silence, they accepted it. Their tablets do not speculate about where the teachers went. They do not mourn loudly. They record what remains. Kingship continues, but its scale shrinks. Knowledge persists, but it is framed as inherited. Silence becomes the boundary between epochs. Flood narratives often distract us with drama, but their deeper function is temporal. They separate kinds of time. Before the water's diversity, after the water's uniformity. Before multiple categories of beings, after one dominant form. The silence is ecological, not merely cultural. It speaks of reduction. Geology understands this language. Catastrophes simplify landscapes brutally. Complexity takes time to rebuild. River systems rearrange. Coastlines retreat. Species vanish quietly, leaving behind only indirect traces. If pre-human populations existed in limited ecological niches, flood-prone valleys, coastal plains, underwater springs, a single prolonged catastrophe could erase them almost completely. Silence follows extinction, not immediately, but inevitably. Stories persist for a while, names linger, then references thin. Eventually only echoes remain encoded in ritual and architecture. The Sumerian silence feels like that stage where memory is still present but direct experience has ended. I think of irradiation again, how it decays predictably, halving itself into invisibility. Memory behaves similarly. Without reinforcement, it fades into background noise. The Sumerians reinforced what they could. They rebuilt temples according to ancient measurements. They copied star tables. They carved guardian forms into stone, but they could not restore presence. Silence also appears in the archaeological record. Beneath flood layers, artifacts become sparse, not absent but scattered. Tools without context, foundations without continuity. It is the signature of interruption. Not gradual abandonment, but sudden displacement followed by time. In my own work, silence has taught me patience. When instruments detect nothing, the temptation is to assume failure. But often silence indicates a boundary condition, a region where previous models no longer apply. The Sumerian silence feels like such a boundary, the end of a system we do not fully understand. There is humility in accepting that. Science thrives not on certainty but on restraint, on knowing when to stop filling gaps with assumptions. The Sumerians did not over-explain the silence. They preserved it. They let it exist as part of the record. The silence is not peaceful, but it is not hostile either. It is neutral, like space between stars. It allows room for reflection. It invites later observers to notice what is missing without telling them how to feel about it. I imagine a scribe generations after the flood copying an older tablet, encountering a name no one recognizes anymore. He does not erase it. He preserves it faithfully even if its meaning has thinned. That act matters. It allows silence to speak across millennia. You're not meant to resolve this tonight, traveller. Silence is not a problem to solve. It is a condition to observe. It is the universe pausing between statements, thinking slowly. Somewhere beyond our reach, something ancient no longer moves. And that absence has shape. It bends history around it. It leaves humanity standing alone in the aftermath, surrounded by inherited systems we did not design from nothing. The silence after the flood is not the end of the story. It is the space where the story changes scale, from coexistence to solitude, from diversity to inheritance, from participation to stewardship. As the night deepens, allow that silence to remain intact. Do not rush to fill it. Let it be what it is. Because in the end, listener, it is all right to not understand. Some mysteries wait, others watch, and some simply fall silent, leaving us to drift gently into sleep with questions that do not need answers to be meaningful. There are moments in research when time stops behaving like a straight line and begins to feel like a deep lake. The present floats on the surface, bright and familiar, while below it darker layers drift stacked without clear boundaries. The Sumerians seem to sense this. Their texts do not treat the past as something left behind, but as something submerged, still present, still exerting pressure from below. A forgotten epoch is not erased. It is covered. Long before the first dynasties, before kingship narrowed into human hands, the tablets speak of an earlier world already complex, already ordered. Cities existed. Knowledge circulated. Authority functioned. This is not described as a dream time or a vague golden age. It is described procedurally with lists, measurements, and roles. The forgotten epoch is not mythical because it is perfect. It is unsettling because it is ordinary. I imagine that earlier world as a system in equilibrium, shaped by beings who understood cycles longer than human lifespans, not immortal in the poetic sense, but extended enough that urgency behaved differently. When time stretches, planning changes. Architecture becomes patient. Astronomy becomes generational. Decisions account for centuries rather than seasons. That kind of thinking leaves traces even after the thinkers vanish. The Sumerians wrote as the inheritors of that residue. They did not claim to have invented the fundamentals. They restored them. Again and again, inscriptions describe temples rebuilt according to ancient plans, foundations laid before the flood, measurements set by those who came earlier. Restoration is a revealing word. You do not restore what never existed. You do not restore what you do not recognize. In my own notebooks, I have pages filled with crossed-out hypotheses, revisions layered over revisions. Knowledge rarely arrives cleanly. But inheritance does. When a solution is passed down, it appears whole, even if the recipient does not fully grasp its origin. The Forgotten Epoch feels like that. A complete system whose reasoning was no longer accessible, only its results. This may explain the strange confidence of early Sumerian science. They did not experiment openly in the record, they applied, they calculated, they observed in ways that assume prior calibration. Their star lists are not tentative. Their calendars do not debate. Their mathematics does not wander. It proceeds as if the groundwork had already been done. A forgotten epoch also leaves cultural gravity. Later societies orbit it unconsciously. Rituals persist without clear justification. Symbols remain fixed even when meaning thins. The bird-headed guardians, the fish-scaled teachers, the winged measurers do not evolve because they are not inventions. They are references copied faithfully long after context has faded. I have seen similar behavior in modern science. Equations are reused long after the original derivations are forgotten by most practitioners. We trust them because they work. The Sumerians trusted what they inherited because it worked. Irrigation functioned. Temples stood. Calendars aligned. Success does not require understanding origin. The Forgotten Epoch also reframes catastrophe. The flood is not merely destructive. It is selective. It removes participants but leaves infrastructure. It erases teachers but spares lessons. In ecological terms, it is not total annihilation. It is a bottleneck. Complexity narrows, then rebuilds from what survives. Geology supports such bottlenecks. Climate shifts do not wipe Earth clean. They rearrange dominance. Species adapted to certain niches vanish. Others persist. If pre-human beings occupied specialized environments, coastal zones, underwater springs, highland refugees, their vulnerability would differ from ours. The flood may have targeted their world more precisely than ours. The Sumerians seemed aware of this asymmetry. Their creation stories describe humanity as a replacement, not a pinnacle. We were made to assume labor that others abandoned or could no longer perform. That framing belongs to a world where succession is normal. Where species come and go as functions shift. This is difficult for modern identity. We prefer uniqueness. We prefer beginnings. But the Forgotten Epoch suggests continuity without sentiment. Life persists, but forms change. Knowledge survives, but authorship dissolves. What remains is structure. I think often of dust, how it coats everything evenly. Dust does not discriminate between ruins and monuments. It settles as leftover chronology, a quiet record of time passing without intention. The Forgotten Epoch lies beneath such dust, not dramatic, not hidden on purpose, simply outpaced by time. In some sense, the Sumerians were already archaeologists of that lost world. They dug foundations into older foundations. They encountered structures they did not fully recognize. They recorded what they could and moved on. Their humility is striking. They did not claim ownership of the deepest layers. They acknowledged predecessors. Modern archaeology repeats that gesture. Each excavation reveals that what we thought was the beginning is often a midpoint. The deeper we dig, the more provisional our narratives become. The Forgotten Epoch may never resolve into clarity, not because it is false, but because its evidence was not meant to survive intact. Silence plays a role here too. The Forgotten Epoch does not speak loudly. It murmurs through alignment, proportion, repetition, through the feeling that something fits too well too early, through the sense that civilization arrived with memory rather than ignorance. As the night deepens, allow this idea to rest gently. You do not need to imagine specific beings or technologies. The Forgotten Epoch does not require detail to exert influence. It exists as a pattern, a weight beneath history, a reminder that complexity did not begin with us. You are not lost in Space Traveler. You are part of a long sequence of inheritors, each receiving a world shaped by hands they will never meet. That is not a diminishment. It is continuity. Some mysteries are not erased by time. They are softened, rounded by erosion until only their outline remains. The Forgotten Epoch is such an outline visible only when light falls at the right angle. In the end, it is all right to not understand. Forgotten epochs do not demand resurrection. They ask only for acknowledgement. Some mysteries wait, others watch, and some sleep beneath the layers content to remain forgotten while the universe whispers again, and we drift quietly toward rest. Reset is a word that sounds clean, almost gentle, but in nature it is never soft. A reset is pressure applied long enough that complexity gives way. It is the moment when systems collapse into simpler forms, not because they failed, but because the conditions changed. The Sumerians did not describe the flood as a lesson or a warning. They described it as an ending. And endings in the universe are rarely emotional. They are structural. I have watched simulations of planetary systems destabilize, watched orbits stretch and snap as mass redistributes. There is no drama in the equations, just inevitability. When thresholds are crossed, systems reorganize. The flood in the Sumerian memory feels like such a threshold. Not a punishment, not a mythic flourish, but a reset point where one configuration of life could no longer sustain itself. Before the waters, the texts describe multiplicity, different kinds of beings, different origins, different roles. The world was crowded with intelligence. After the waters, that diversity collapses. One form remains dominant. Humanity inherits the surface. Reset does not mean blankness. It means reduction. Geology knows this rhythm well. Ice ages reset ecosystems. Volcanic winters reset food chains. Asteroid impacts reset evolutionary trajectories. Life does not argue with these events. It adapts or vanishes. If the flood was such an event, prolonged, regional, repeated, then it would not need to erase everything to be decisive. It would only need to change the rules long enough. The Sumerian flood is described as total, but memory often compresses time. What may have been centuries of instability becomes a single narrative event. Rivers change course, coastlines retreat, wetlands drown, springs disappear. Species bound to those environments lose their foothold. Humanity, adaptable and terrestrial, survives where others cannot. Reset also explains the abrupt shift in authority. Kingship descends again after the flood, but it descends to humans. The phrase matters again. Something held that role before. Reset does not invent governance. It reallocates it. Power flows toward what remains. In my own work, I learned that resets are not failures of prediction. They are features of complex systems. Climate models include them. Stellar evolution depends on them. Even human technologies rely on them. When a system accumulates too much tension, reset becomes the path of least resistance. The Sumerians did not resist this idea. They accepted it. Their texts do not rage against the flood. They do not attempt to restore what was lost in full. They salvage what they can. Measurements, names, rituals. Knowledge becomes debris collected after catastrophe. There is something deeply scientific in that posture. After a failed experiment, you do not curse reality. You record what happened. You adjust. You continue. The Sumerians behaved like observers of their own reset, aware that they stood on the far side of something irreversible. Reset leaves asymmetry. Before beings taught humanity, after humanity teaches itself using inherited tools, the direction of knowledge transfer changes. Memory becomes more important than innovation. Preservation replaces exploration. Writing becomes essential because direct transmission is gone. This may explain why writing appears so suddenly and so completely. After a reset, memory must be externalized. Oral tradition fractures under disruption. Clay becomes a storage medium for continuity. Writing is not a luxury, it is survival. I think of radiation again, how after a supernova it bathes space, evenly carrying information about an event no longer visible. The Sumerian tablets feel like that radiation. Evidence of a reset, long past, still detectable, still measurable, but no longer connected to its source. Reset also simplifies narratives. Complexity before, simplicity after. That does not mean the earlier world was better, only that it was different. Diversity is fragile, it thrives under stable conditions. Reset favours generalists. Humanity perhaps was the generalist that endured. This idea is unsettling because it removes intention. No chosen species, no destiny, just persistence. The species that remains is the one that can rebuild from fragments. The Sumerians seem to understand this. They did not claim moral superiority. They claimed inheritance. Long nights with instruments teach a similar humility. You realize that the universe does not notice your expectations. It follows its own rhythms. Reset is one of them. Galaxies collide. Stars reignite. Planets resurface. Life adapts. The flood may have been many floods. Not one wall of water, but a prolonged era of instability. Each event eroding certainty until only the most adaptable structures survived. Memory compresses these into a single story because stories need shape. Reset gives it one. What matters is not the literal water level but the function of the event. Separation. Before and after. Multi-species coexistence giving way to singular dominance. Knowledge shifting from lived to remembered. Teachers becoming legends. As the night deepens, allow the idea of reset to settle without resistance. It is not an accusation against humanity. It is context. It places us within a pattern that extends beyond pride and blame. You're not lost in space, listener. You're part of a system that has reset many times and will do so again. Civilizations are not endpoints. They are phases. Consciousness itself may be subject to the same logic. Somewhere beyond our reach, something ancient no longer speaks because its conditions no longer exist. That is not tragedy. It is physics. It is ecology. It is time doing what time does. In the end, traveller, it's all right to not understand. Reset does not ask for comprehension. It simply happens. Some mysteries wait. Others watch. And some reset the board entirely, leaving us to drift gently into the next configuration, carrying what little we can remember as sleep comes quietly and the universe whispers again. An echo is not a voice. It is a shape left behind by sound, a contour traced in air after the source has already gone quiet. In deep caves, echoes arrive late and altered, softened by distance, yet unmistakably related to what first called them into being. History has echoes too, and the Sumerian world feels filled with them reverberations from a presence that no longer stands at the centre of the room. I think often of echoes when reviewing old data sets when a pattern appears without its initiating signal. The numbers line up. The relationships hold. But the origin is missing. The Sumerians lived among such echoes. Their cities, their rituals, their knowledge systems behave like responses to an earlier call, shaped by something that had already passed through and moved on. Architecture carries echoes especially well. Temples rebuilt again and again on the same foundations do not merely occupy space. They remember it. Each reconstruction follows proportions that feel less like innovation and more like fidelity. The builders align walls to points in the sky they did not choose arbitrarily. They repeat gestures whose original purpose is thinned yet whose form remains exact. In acoustics, an echo preserves timing but loses clarity. In culture, echoes preserve structure while losing explanation. The Sumerians knew how to build, how to measure, how to align, but they did not always say why. They followed inherited forms because those forms worked. Success reinforces memory even when meaning fades. The same is true of their cosmology. The heavens were already divided. The paths of planets were already named. The stations of stars were already fixed. Astronomical tablets speak in the language of continuation, not discovery. Observations are framed as confirmations of what was already known. The echo of prior observation lingers in every calculation. I remember a night spent alone with an old telescope tracking a star whose light began its journey, long before humanity learned to write. By the time it reached my eye, its source had changed, perhaps died. Yet the light remained coherent, informative, precise. That is how the Sumerian knowledge feels. Light from a source no longer visible, still guiding orientation. Echoes also shape myth without becoming myth themselves. The Sumerian figures who taught measured and guarded are not framed as distant abstractions. They are described as actors who once occupied space and time. Their later representations become symbolic, but the symbolism preserves form with unusual discipline. Symbols usually simplify. These do not. Artisans carved wings, feather by feather scales, joint by joint. The care suggests obligation rather than imagination. An echo carries enough detail to demand accuracy. You do not distort what you are trying to remember. You copy it as faithfully as possible, even if you no longer know what it means. The echo extends into language. Phrases like "before the flood" recur without elaboration. They function as temporal anchors, not narrative devices. The audience is expected to understand their weight. An echo assumes shared memory. Only later readers feel the absence. In my own work, I have encountered similar moments where a method persists long after its rationale is no longer taught. We use equations derived centuries ago without rederiving them. We trust the echo because it has proven reliable. The Sumerians trusted their echoes because their world held together when they did. Echoes can be misleading if mistaken for origins. That is the danger. When we see sophistication, we assume invention. When we see order, we assume emergence. But echoes invert that logic. They suggest that order can persist after its creators are gone, that systems can outlive their designers. The flood did not erase echoes. It amplified them. By removing the source, it made the residue more visible. After the waters receded, humanity found itself surrounded by forms that worked but no longer spoke. Knowledge became a landscape rather than a conversation. There is a quiet melancholy in that. Not grief, but awareness. To live among echoes is to know that something important has ended, even if its consequences remain beneficial. The Sumerians did not dramatize this feeling. They integrated it. Their rituals honored predecessors without expecting their return. Echoes also explain continuity without contact, why later civilizations inherited Sumerian systems that seemed already mature, why Babylonian astronomers copied tables they did not originate, why Assyrian kings restored temples according to ancient measurements. They were all responding to the same echo. In physics, echoes can interfere constructively or destructively. They can reinforce patterns or cancel them. In culture, echoes reinforce stability. They slow change. They anchor societies to older configurations. This may explain why Mesopotamian civilization maintained certain structures for millennia, while others evolved more rapidly. The echo does not mean stagnation. It means orientation. It gives a reference point. Humanity, after the reset, needed that. With teachers gone, the echo became the guide. As the night deepens, I find comfort in the idea that we too live among echoes. Technologies built on forgotten discoveries. Sciences grounded in insights whose first observers are anonymous. Languages shaped by extinct tongues. Our world hums with residue. You're not lost in Space Traveler. You're moving through fields of influence left by countless past events. Some are recent, some are ancient. All shape your path whether you notice them or not. The Sumerians noticed. They recorded. They preserved. They accepted that understanding would thin with time, but structure could remain. That acceptance is a form of wisdom rarely acknowledged. Echoes do not demand belief. They invite listening. They ask for patience. They reward attention. Tonight the universe whispers again, and much of what it says arrives as echo rather than voice. Somewhere beyond our reach, something ancient no longer speaks directly. But its shape remains in our calendars, our measurements, our ruins, our stories. That is enough to matter. In the end, listener, it is all right to not understand. Echoes are not meant to explain themselves. Some mysteries wait, others watch, and some only echo gently fading as we drift towards sleep, carried by patterns that began long before us and continue quietly through the night. Patterns are how the universe remembers itself. They are repetition without intention, structure without sentiment, motion settling into form because it has done so before. In science, we learn to trust patterns cautiously. They can reveal deep laws, or they can mislead, appearing meaningful only because we wish them to be. Yet some patterns persist regardless of belief. They endure observation. They survive doubt. The Sumerian world is threaded with such patterns, quiet, consistent, and difficult to dismiss. I began noticing them not as a historian, but as a scientist trained to look for recurrence. Long nights spent with data teach you to ignore the dramatic outlier and attend to what repeats calmly. The same symbols, the same measurements, the same alignments. Over centuries across empires, through languages that replaced one another, certain structures remained unchanged. That kind of stability is rare. It suggests something deeper than tradition. Consider how the Sumerians organized time, the division of the day, the circle, the sky. 60 appears again and again, not because it is easy, but because it works. It divides cleanly. It supports cycles. It allows prediction. Patterns like this do not emerge accidentally. They are selected either through long trial or inherited understanding. Yet no earlier trials appear. The pattern arrives complete. Architecture echoes the same logic. Temples align with solstices. City grids respect cardinal directions. Sacred geometry appears before it is named as such. These are not decorative choices. They are functional, tied to light-shadow season and ritual timing. The same alignments recur even when dynasties change. Power shifts, names fade, the pattern remains. In my own work, I learned that patterns often outlive their creators. A mathematical relationship persists even when the civilization that discovered it collapses. A physical constant does not renegotiate itself when observers disappear. The Sumerian patterns feel like that. Less like cultural habits, more like physical laws embedded into human systems. The texts reinforce this impression. Knowledge is described as established long ago. Measurements were set. Paths were marked. Later scribes copy rather than revise. They speak of preservation, not innovation. Even when new observations are added, they are framed as confirmations of an older framework. Pattern, again asserting precedence. I think of gravity here, how it shapes motion without caring what falls. Planets dust light. Gravity does not announce itself. It simply repeats its effect. Cultural gravity behaves similarly. Once a pattern proves stable, later societies curve around it unconsciously. The Sumerians curved around something older than themselves. Patterns also appear in myth, but not in the way we usually expect. Mythology tends to evolve, to absorb new meanings, to simplify or embellish over time. But certain Sumerian figures resist that drift. Their forms remain fixed, their roles unchanged. The bird-headed, the fish, scaled, the winged measurers persist with anatomical precision. Pattern resists reinterpretation. Why would imagination constrain itself so tightly? Why not allow variation, symbolism, abstraction? The persistence suggests reference, not invention. A pattern copied carefully because deviation would feel like error. In biology, patterns encode survival strategies. DNA repeats sequences because they work. Mutations occur, but successful structures persist. Cultural patterns behave similarly. Those that align with reality endure. Those that do not fade. The Sumerian patterns endured because they continued to function after the reset. I remember working with long climate records ice cores revealing temperature cycles spanning tens of thousands of years. The data looks chaotic until you zoom out. Then repetition emerges. Warming, cooling, stability, collapse, reset, pattern again. Human history fits within that larger rhythm whether we acknowledge it or not. The Sumerian record seems aware of this. Their king lists frame history as cyclical. Kingship descends, ends, descends again. The flood is not unique. It is a boundary between cycles, before and after. Pattern gives structure to catastrophe, making it intelligible without diminishing its impact. Astronomy makes the pattern explicit. The slow wobble of Earth's axis, the precession of equinoxes, unfolds over 26,000 years. Too long for a single human life to perceive directly. Yet the Sumerian tradition hints at awareness of this cycle. Ages associated with constellations. Shifts moving backward through the zodiac. Knowledge that requires either immense patience or inheritance. If such patterns were recognized, they would not be discovered quickly. They would be taught, passed down, preserved across generations. Pattern recognition at that scale implies observers who measured beyond individual lifespans. Whether human collectives or something else, the pattern itself remains. Patterns also explain the sense of destiny woven into the Sumerian worldview. Not destiny as fate, but as placement. Humanity arrives at a certain point in the cycle, not first, not last, just positioned. The texts do not glorify this, they accept it. Acceptance is a form of understanding deeper than certainty. In my own life, patterns brought peace once I stopped resisting them. Long nights with instruments taught me that not everything bends to intervention. Some things repeat regardless of effort. Recognizing that allows rest, it allows humility, it allows sleep. The Sumerians seem to carry that humility. They did not erase what came before. They did not pretend originality where inheritance was evident. They acknowledged pattern openly. Before the flood, after the flood. The phrase recurs like a metronome marking time beyond individual events. Patterns can feel oppressive if misunderstood. They can suggest inevitability, loss of agency, but they can also offer comfort. They remind us that change is not chaos. It is transition. Reset does not mean annihilation. It means rearrangement within a larger rhythm. You're not lost in space, traveller. You are moving along a path shaped by patterns far older than intention. Your questions, your curiosity, even your doubts follow trajectories set long before you noticed them. That does not diminish them. It situates them. Somewhere beyond our reach, something ancient no longer observes. But the patterns it participated in continue. They guide tides, seasons, orbits, civilizations. They do not require belief. They operate quietly, indifferent to interpretation. As the night deepens, allow the idea of pattern to settle like dust. You do not need to map it fully. You only need to feel its presence, the sense that repetition is not emptiness, but memory expressing itself through motion. Tonight, the universe whispers again, not with answers, but with rhythm. And rhythm does not ask to be solved. It asks to be felt. In the end, listener, it's all right to not understand. Patterns do not need explanation to persist. Some mysteries wait, others watch, and some simply repeat gently, steadily, carrying us towards sleep as the cosmos continues its quiet work. Warnings are rarely delivered as alarms. In nature, they arrive as thresholds, quietly crossed signals so subtle they're only recognized in hindsight. Ice thins before it breaks. Orbits destabilize long before collision. Civilizations, too, receive warnings not as proclamations, but as patterns repeating with increasing clarity. The Sumerian record carries such a warning, though it never names it as one. The warning is not about punishment or morality. It is about scale, about what happens when intelligence forgets the conditions that allowed it to exist. The Sumerians did not frame the flood as a story of guilt. They framed it as consequence. When systems grow too complex, too crowded, too strained, they invite collapse. Not because of evil, but because balance has shifted. I remember working late nights with climate models, watching lines curve slowly upward, then accelerate. The danger was never in the spike. It was in the calm before it when change appeared manageable. The Sumerian flood reads the same way. The texts describe a world already burdened. Labour too heavy, noise too great, resources stretched thin. The warning is embedded in description, not sermon. Before the reset, multiple beings shared the world, multiple intelligences, multiple claims on land-water labour. That kind of coexistence demands stability. It requires surplus. It tolerates little error. Once climate faltered, once rivers misbehaved, once cooperation fractured, the system became brittle. The flood did not create the fragility. It revealed it. The Atrahasis epic makes this explicit in a way modern readers often overlook. The lesser beings labour endlessly. They rebel not out of malice, but exhaustion. The system is unsustainable. The response is not reform. It is replacement. Humanity is created to assume the burden. This is not a triumph. It is an admission of failure. Warnings often sound like solutions at first. Create a new workforce. Simplify the system. Reduce diversity. Concentrate authority. These moves restore short-term stability, but they carry long-term costs. The Sumerians recorded the outcome honestly. After the flood, the world is quieter, more orderly, but also diminished. I think of biodiversity loss in our own era. Ecosystems simplify under stress. Generalists thrive. Specialists vanish. The system becomes easier to manage but less resilient. The warning is not that collapse will happen. It is that what survives may be poorer even if it persists. The Sumerians seemed aware of this loss. Their texts carry nostalgia without sentimentality. They speak of teachers who no longer walk among humans, of wisdom that must now be accessed through ritual rather than conversation. The warning is subtle. When knowledge becomes symbolic, direct understanding has already ended. Warnings also appear in the way later generations treat the past. Temples are rebuilt precisely but without innovation. Astronomy is preserved but not expanded at the same pace. Culture becomes conservative. Stability replaces exploration. This is not decline, it is adaptation after trauma. In my own life, I have felt similar shifts after periods of crisis. Curiosity narrows, risk feels heavier, preservation becomes priority. Sleep itself changes after prolonged stress. The body seeks safety before novelty. Civilizations behave the same way. The warning then is not apocalyptic. It is cautionary. Intelligence is not guaranteed continuity. Knowledge does not ensure survival. Sophistication can increase vulnerability. The Sumerians did not claim immunity. They documented what happened when balance failed. Another layer of warning lies in how quickly memory thins. Within a few generations, beings who once acted become mythologized. Their technical contributions become divine attributes. Tools become symbols. When understanding fades, reverence replaces comprehension. That transition marks the end of active learning. Modern science faces similar risks. Equations used without intuition. Technologies deployed without grasp of underlying principles. When systems grow opaque, maintenance replaces mastery. The Sumerian warning is timeless. Knowledge must remain lived, not merely archived. The flood narratives also warn about overconfidence in singular explanations. Later scholars search for one global deluge, one date, one cause. The evidence resisted that simplicity. Floods occurred repeatedly, regionally, unevenly. Memory compressed them into one story because the effect was the same: collapse, reset, reduction. Warnings are often misunderstood because they do not align neatly with our categories. The Sumerian warning is not religious, not scientific, not moral. It is ecological. It speaks to limits, to carrying capacity, to the cost of complexity without redundancy. I find a strange comfort in this. Warnings framed as punishment inspire fear. Warnings framed as physics invite adjustment. The universe does not judge, it responds. When thresholds are crossed, responses follow. You're not lost in space, traveller. You are living within systems that also carry warnings, though they may be quieter than headlines. Climate curves, resource depletion, cultural fragmentation. These are not prophecies. They are patterns repeating under new conditions. The Sumerians did not ask their descendants to prevent the flood retroactively. They asked them to remember it. Memory is the only leverage intelligence has over repetition. When memory fails, patterns repeat without mitigation. As the night deepens, allow this warning to settle without urgency. It does not demand action tonight. It does not require resolution. It asks only for awareness, for humility, for recognition that intelligence is fragile and context-dependent. Somewhere beyond our reach, something ancient learned this lesson and vanished anyway. Not because it ignored the warning, but because conditions overwhelmed it. Survival is not virtue, it is circumstance. In the end, listener, it is all right to not understand every mechanism. Warnings do not always explain themselves fully. Some mysteries wait, others watch, and some whisper caution across millennia, hoping only to be noticed, before sleep carries us into the same repeating dream again. The sky remembers longer than the earth. Stone erodes, cities sink, names fade. But the movements above persist with indifferent precision, repeating themselves whether anyone watches or not. The Sumerians understood this deeply. When the ground betrayed them with floods and silence, they looked upward, not for escape, but for continuity. The sky became their archive, a place where memory could survive catastrophe. I have spent many nights beneath open domes listening to the quiet click of tracking mounts as stars crossed fields of view laid out centuries before I was born. In those moments, the sky does not feel distant. It feels patient. The same stars that guided ancient observers trace their paths again, unbothered by who names them. That patience is what drew the Sumerians upward after the reset. Their astronomical texts do not read like discoveries made in haste. They read like confirmations of something already known. Constellations are listed with confidence. Planetary motions are tracked with expectation, not surprise. Eclipses are predicted as if their recurrence is familiar. The sky for the Sumerians was not a mystery unfolding. It was a memory continuing. This is difficult to reconcile with the timescales involved. Some celestial cycles reveal themselves only after generations of careful observation. The slow drift of star positions, the subtle irregularities in planetary motion, the long rhythm of eclipses. These are not patterns one learns quickly. Yet the Sumerian tradition speaks of them as established, inherited, measured long ago. I think of light travelling across space, carrying information from events long past. When we observe distant galaxies, we're not seeing them as they are, but as they were. Astronomy is memory by another name. The Sumerians practiced this intuitively. They treated the sky as a record of earlier order, a stable reference when the earth could no longer be trusted. Their temples reflect this orientation. Axes aligned with solstice points. Doorways framing rising stars. Architecture becomes an instrument translating celestial memory into stone and mud brick. The city itself becomes a kind of observatory, not for novelty, but for calibration. Each year confirms alignment. Each cycle reinforces trust. The sky also carries authority in their worldview. Kingship descends from heaven. Not metaphorically, but structurally. Authority is linked to alignment with cosmic order. When earthly systems fail, legitimacy must be re-established by reference to something more stable. The sky offers that stability. In my own field, reference frames matter. Without them, measurement collapses. The Sumerians chose the sky as their reference frame because it outlasted floods, wars, and dynasties. When memory on Earth fractured, memory in the sky remained intact. There is a quiet warning embedded in this choice. Earthbound knowledge is vulnerable. It depends on continuity of culture and environment. Celestial knowledge once established is hard to erase. It requires only eyes and patience. Even when writing falters, the sky continues to teach. The Sumerian star list preserved this logic. They are copied carefully across centuries, languages, empires. Scribes note that they are transcribing older sources. The act of copying becomes ritualized not because of reverence alone, but because accuracy matters. A misplaced star undermines the entire framework. This fidelity suggests respect for something older than the scribes themselves. The sky becomes a bridge to the forgotten epoch, a way to remain oriented to knowledge that predated the reset. Even if the teachers were gone, their measurements remained accessible. I find something comforting in that. When systems collapse, not everything is lost. Some references endure. In physics, conservation laws survive violent interactions. Energy changes form but does not disappear. Momentum redistributes. The sky in the Sumerian imagination conserved order when everything else was rearranged. But the sky also introduces distance. The beings once described as walking among humans are now associated with heights. They withdraw upward. Knowledge that was once direct becomes abstract, measured rather than taught. The sky replaces presence with pattern. This shift matters. Direct instruction allows adaptation. Pattern recognition alone encourages preservation. The Sumerians preserved brilliantly, but innovation slows when reference replaces dialogue. The sky cannot answer questions. It only repeats itself. Still, repetition has value. It anchors thought. It provides rhythm. The Sumerians used celestial cycles to regulate agriculture, ritual, and governance. Time becomes predictable again. Stability returns, though thinner than before. As the night deepens, the sky above you performs the same quiet service. Stars rise and set. Planets wander, cycles repeat. You are not witnessing novelty. You're witnessing continuity. The comfort lies in that sameness. You're not lost in Space Traveller. You're under it, held by its patterns. The same sky that guided ancient observers arches above you, now unchanged in its indifference, reliable in its motion. Somewhere beyond our reach, something ancient once looked up at these same stars, perhaps measuring them, perhaps teaching their paths. Whether human or not no longer matters. The sky remembers regardless of who observes. In the end, it is all right to not understand the full origin of this knowledge. The sky does not require comprehension to function as reference. Some mysteries wait, others watch, and some simply continue overhead, steady and untroubled as sleep approaches and the universe whispers again through the quiet turning of the stars. The earth remembers differently than the sky. Where the sky preserves through repetition, the earth preserves through burial. It does not keep motion intact. It keeps fragments. Pressure replaces clarity. Layers accumulate, each one compressing what came before into quieter forms. The Sumerians understood this instinctively. When the heavens offered continuity, the earth offered testimony. Not spoken, not ordered, but pressed into soil, stone, and sediment. I have spent long hours reading stratigraphic reports, studying diagrams, where colour bands replace centuries and millennia are reduced to centimetres. The earth does not narrate, it stacks. And in those stacks, time behaves like gravity, pulling everything downward into partial obscurity. The deeper you go, the less complete the story becomes, but the heavier it feels. Southern Mesopotamia is a place where earth and water argue constantly. Rivers wander, floodplains expand and contract. Sediment arrives in pulses thick and decisive. When archaeologists dig there, they are not uncovering a clean sequence. They are negotiating with interruption. Flood layers cut histories in half. Foundations rest on other foundations with no explanation preserved between them. The Sumerians lived on top of these interruptions. They built cities where the ground itself was unstable, where memory could be swallowed overnight by water and silt. That vulnerability shaped their relationship with the earth. They did not treat land as permanent. They treated it as something that had to be read, respected, and occasionally abandoned. Beneath their cities, the earth holds anomalies quietly. Older walls at unexpected angles, tool marks that do not match known technologies, layers where artifacts thin abruptly, as if activity stopped without warning. These are not conclusions. They are signatures of disruption. The earth does not explain why something ended. It only shows that it did. In Eridu, the deepest temple levels rest on what archaeologists call virgin soil, yet they are not crude. They already understand orientation. They already respect proportion. There is no visible apprenticeship phase preserved beneath them. The earth presents this without comment like a paused sentence. The implication is not explicit. It does not need to be. At Kish, flint tools appear in strata far older than expected alongside trade materials that imply connections not yet supposed to exist. At Uruk, massive stone blocks lie beneath later platforms transported from distant quarries, with logistical coordination difficult to reconcile with the small settlements that supposedly preceded the city. The earth does not argue. It simply contains. I remember holding a fragment of pottery once its surface smoothed by centuries of pressure. The hand that shaped it is gone. The reason it was made is gone. But the object remains altered, quieter, heavier with time. Earth does that. It removes intention, but preserves consequence. The Sumerians seemed aware of this selective memory. They placed foundation deposits beneath temples, sealing objects into the earth deliberately. Figurines, tools, inscriptions. Not meant to be seen again. These were not offerings for gods alone. They were messages to the future embedded in soil rather than story. This act acknowledges something important. Earth is not just ground, it is archive. A difficult one, fragmentary and biased toward survival of certain materials, but an archive nonetheless. What survives there has endured pressure water collapse. It has passed a test of persistence. Flood narratives, when read alongside geology, take on a different tone. They are not exaggerated morality plays. They are attempts to articulate what Earth does during periods of instability. Water erases boundaries, sediment compresses time. Entire ways of life can vanish beneath a single layer of clay. The Earth does not discriminate between species, it preserves what conditions allow. If pre-human beings existed as the Sumerian texts suggest, their disappearance need not be dramatic. A change in groundwater chemistry, a prolonged inundation, loss of a specific habitat. Extinction can occur without spectacle. The Earth is efficient that way. What remains after such loss is rarely complete. Bones dissolve, organic material decays, only indirect traces persist. Tool marks, foundations, alignments, gaps where continuity should be. The Earth speaks in absences as much as in artifacts. In my own work, I learned to trust those absences cautiously. A missing layer can indicate erosion, or it can indicate abandonment. Context matters. In Mesopotamia, the pattern of absence is too consistent to ignore. Across multiple sites, deep layers show organization without clear lineage to what comes above. Then a flood layer, then reorganization. This suggests not gradual evolution but replacement. Not necessarily violent but decisive. The Earth resets by burying complexity and allowing simpler systems to re-establish on top. Over time, those systems may grow complex again until the next reset. The Sumerians encoded this understanding in their myths, but the Earth confirms it without poetry. Sediment does not embellish, it accumulates, it presses, it forgets selectively. Civilization builds atop that forgetting. I find a strange calm in that. The Earth does not judge ambition. It accommodates it until conditions shift. Then it accommodates something else. Human dominance is not guaranteed by intention. It is negotiated continuously with geology. The Sumerians built knowing this. Their cities were not eternal monuments. They were layered responses to an unstable landscape. Each rebuild acknowledged prior collapse. That humility is visible in their architecture in the way temples rise from older ruins without erasing them completely. Earth memory is slow and patient. It does not align neatly with written history. It stretches and compresses events beyond narrative comfort. But when text and sediment align even partially, the resonance is difficult to dismiss. You are not meant to resolve this tonight, traveller. The Earth does not rush clarity. It works over millennia. Understanding comes slowly, if at all. Sometimes it never arrives, and that too is part of the record. As you lie still, imagine the weight beneath you. Layers upon layers, each one holding fragments of worlds that once felt complete to those who lived in them. The Earth carries them all without preference. Somewhere below foundations lie that were not meant for us. Measurements set by hands we will never meet. Alignments chosen for skies that still turn above us. The Earth remembers them, even if we cannot read them fully. In the end, listener, it is all right to not understand. Earth does not demand comprehension. It demands time. Some mysteries wait, others watch, and some sleep beneath our feet, content to remain compressed into silence, while we drift gently toward rest, held between the patient sky above and the remembering Earth below. Return is never reversal. In physics, systems do not travel backward along the same path. They circle, they oscillate, they approximate what once was, but they do so under new conditions. The Sumerians seem to understand this distinction intuitively. When they spoke of return, they did not mean restoration of the old world. They meant entry into continuity after interruption, a return to rhythm, not to origin. After the flood, the texts say, kingship descended from heaven once more. The phrase is careful, once more, not for the first time. Authority order structure return, but they return, altered, constrained by what remains. Humanity steps into roles once held by others, but without the same reach, without the same scale. Return does not restore abundance, it restores function. I have felt this personally after long nights of failure in research, when a project collapses under its own complexity. You do not resume where you left off, you begin again with what survived. Notes, partial models, intuition stripped of certainty. The second attempt is quieter, more cautious, more aware of limits. Civilization after the flood feels like that kind of return. The Sumerians rebuilt cities on older foundations, but they did not claim those foundations as their own inventions. They acknowledged inheritance. They rebuilt temples according to ancient measurements, even when the reasoning behind those measurements had thinned. This is not stagnation. It is continuity under constraint. Return also appears in ritual. Offerings resume, calendars restart, festivals align once more with celestial cycles. Life regains structure. But the tone has changed. The beings once described as walking among humans are now invoked rather than encountered. Knowledge that was once relational becomes symbolic. Return brings order, but also distance. In astronomy, return is predictable. Planets complete orbits. Comets revisit the inner system after long absence altered by heat and loss. They are recognizably the same but diminished. The Sumerian return feels similar. Civilization resumes recognizable, functional, but missing something that once shaped it more directly. The flood survivors do not rebuild everything. They rebuild selectively. Irrigation networks reappear. Urban planning resumes. Writing spreads. But diversity narrows. Species vanish from the record. Authority centralizes. The world becomes simpler, easier to manage, but less rich. This narrowing is not framed as tragedy. It is framed as necessity. Return after catastrophe is pragmatic. You do not mourn what cannot be restored endlessly. You adapt to what is possible. The Sumerians accepted this. Their texts do not fantasize about restoring the pre-flood world fully. They honor it, then move forward. I think of ecosystems after mass extinctions. Recovery is not a return to former complexity. It is the emergence of new configurations from what survives. Mammals rose after dinosaurs not because they were superior, but because they were adaptable. Humanity after the flood may occupy a similar ecological role, not chosen but available. Return also carries memory forward in altered form. Names persist but roles change. Enki remains a god but his direct interventions diminish. The sages remain revered but no longer appear. Return transforms presence into principle. In my own work, I've learned that models rarely survive contact with reality intact. What returns after failure is a simplified version stripped of excess closer to the core assumptions that actually matter. The Sumerian return feels like a cultural model pruned by catastrophe. There is humility in that pruning. Grand narratives shrink. Certainty dissolves. What remains is practical knowledge, ritualized memory, and an awareness of fragility. The Sumerians carried this awareness into their governance. Kingship is no longer eternal. Reigns shorten. Mortality becomes explicit. Return also reframes destiny. Humanity is not crowned as ultimate. It is positioned as caretaker. The texts emphasize labor maintenance continuity. Humans assume responsibility for a world already shaped, already scarred. Return assigns duty, not glory. This perspective is rare in myth. Most cultures place themselves at the center. The Sumerians place themselves after the flood, after the teachers, after the long rains. Their humility may be the most unsettling part of the record. Return also explains why fear does not dominate the narrative. Catastrophe has already happened. What follows is adjustment. The texts are not obsessed with preventing the flood again. They focus on living within limits. That is the psychology of return. Once loss is accepted, panic subsides. I find comfort in that attitude. The universe does not guarantee stability. It offers cycles. Collapse is not failure. It is transition. Return is how systems persist without pretending to be eternal. As night deepens, imagine standing at the edge of a rebuilt city knowing it rests on ruins older than memory. The walls are solid, the streets function, life continues, but beneath it all lies awareness. This is not the first version of the world. You are not lost in Space Traveller. You are part of a returning system shaped by resets you did not witness and inheritances you did not choose. That is not a burden. It is context. Somewhere beyond our reach, something ancient did not return. Its absence defines the boundaries of what followed. Return always carries loss forward implicitly. What remains is shaped as much by what is gone as by what survived. In the end, listener, it is all right to not understand every layer of this return. The Sumerians did not claim full comprehension either. They recorded what they could, rebuilt what worked, and accepted the silence where answers no longer lived. Some mysteries wait, others watch, and some return only as echoes guiding structure without explanation, as we drift quietly into sleep, carried not backward into origins, but forward into continuity, while the universe whispers again in the patient language of cycles. Reflection is not the act of solving. It is the act of sitting with what remains when certainty dissolves. The Sumerians did this with unusual honesty. They did not rush to explain away what they inherited. They allowed contradictions to stand. They let myth and measurement coexist not because they lacked rigour, but because rigour alone could not contain the scale of what had been lost. I imagine an elderly scribe, late in life, fingers stiff copying an ancient tablet, whose language already felt old when he first learned it. He knows the symbols precisely. He understands the ritual of preservation. But the meaning behind certain phrases no longer resolves cleanly. He copies anyway. Reflection in this sense becomes fidelity without full comprehension. Modern science reaches similar moments. Data accumulates. Models work within limits. And then anomalies persist. Rather than discard them, we archive them carefully, waiting for a framework not yet born. Reflection is what allows knowledge to remain open-ended rather than brittle. The Sumerian texts reflect a culture aware of standing on the far side of something immense. They speak with the tone of survivors who know the ground beneath them is layered with endings. Their myths do not promise progress without interruption. They assume interruption as a feature of reality. In this, they were closer to geology than to theology. Earth does not evolve smoothly. It lurches. It resets. It forgets violently, then rebuilds patiently. Reflection is how intelligence learns to inhabit that rhythm without despair. I have felt this during long solitary nights in observatories when results refuse to align neatly. The universe does not respond to urgency. It responds to patience. Reflection is a slowing down to match its pace. The Sumerians reflected on their place with humility. Humans are described as workers, caretakers, maintainers of order rather than originators of it. That self-image is rare. It suggests awareness that intelligence can be provisional, that dominance may be temporary. Reflection also reveals what the Sumerians did not claim. They did not declare themselves chosen. They did not assert superiority over what came before. They acknowledged inheritance without ownership. That restraint is striking. When reflection replaces conquest, memory deepens. The Sumerians preserved lists of kings whose reigns stretched impossibly long, not to compete with them but to mark a boundary between eras. They did not try to replicate pre-flood longevity. They accepted mortality as part of the new world. This acceptance shapes everything that follows. Time becomes precious. Measurement becomes careful. Writing becomes essential. Reflection turns fragility into motivation rather than fear. I think of how modern humans reflect on deep time. We now know our species occupies a narrow slice of Earth's history. That knowledge has not made us humble by default, but it has created the possibility of humility. Reflection is what decides whether that possibility is realized. The Sumerians appear to have crossed that threshold. They reflected not only on catastrophe but on coexistence. Their texts remember multiple beings sharing the world without insisting on hierarchy. Difference is noted, not condemned. That may be the quietest lesson of all. Reflection does not ask whether the pre-flood beings were gods, aliens, or metaphors. It asks what it meant to remember them as real participants in history. The answer is not ontological, it is psychological. The Sumerians lived as if they were not alone in the long story of intelligence. Living that way changes priorities. It reduces arrogance. It reframes achievement as stewardship. Reflection turns knowledge into responsibility. In my own life, reflection has often arrived after failure, after hypotheses collapse, after certainty erodes. What remains is not emptiness, but clarity about limits. That clarity is not discouraging. It is grounding. The Sumerians grounded themselves similarly. Their calendars anchor time. Their measurements stabilize space. Their myths contextualize loss. Reflection becomes infrastructure. This is why their civilization endured as long as it did, not because it avoided catastrophe, but because it integrated catastrophe into its world-view. Reflection allowed continuity without denial. As you rest, now allow that mode of thinking to settle. You do not need answers tonight. You do not need resolution. Reflection is enough. You are not lost in Space Traveler. You are reflecting within it, participating in a process older than any single species. The universe does not require understanding to include you. It requires only presence. Some mysteries aren't meant to be solved, only observed. Some truths do not sharpen with explanation. They soften with acceptance. The Sumerians understood this. Their greatest achievement may not have been writing astronomy or cities, but the decision to remember without closure, to preserve questions alongside knowledge. Reflection keeps the door open. It allows future minds to return to the same fragments and see something new. It is an act of generosity across time. In the end, listener, it is all right to not understand. Reflection is not failure. It is participation. Some mysteries wait, others watch, and some settle gently into the quiet space between thought and sleep, where understanding is no longer required, only rest, as the universe continues its patient whispering beyond the edge of certainty. Night does not arrive suddenly. It lowers itself in layers the way sediment settles after a flood, slowly without sound, until the surface of thought becomes still. This is the moment the Sumerians seem to understand best. After memory, after warning, after return and reflection, there is only descent, not collapse, not forgetting, but a deliberate easing downward into rest. I imagine the end of a long day in an ancient city, the heat finally loosening its grip on stone walls, lamps flickering as shadows stretch across courtyards. Work has ended, rituals are complete, the sky has been consulted, the earth has been walked. What remains is sleep, not as escape, but as alignment with cycles older than thought. Sleep is where intelligence releases control. In biology, it is where memory consolidates, where excess signals quiet, where the nervous system recalibrates. In civilization, sleep appears as pause, as tradition, as repetition. The Sumerians encoded this rhythm into their days and years, knowing that continuity depends not only on action, but on rest. I have often noticed this during long research campaigns. Progress slows not because effort decreases, but because the mind needs darkness to integrate what light has revealed. Data without rest becomes noise. Meaning requires intervals of quiet. Descent is not weakness, it is function. The flood myths end not with rebuilding alone, but with rest. The survivor sleeps, the gods withdraw, the waters settle, silence follows action. This silence is not empty, it is necessary. Without it, repetition becomes chaos. As listener, you're entering that same phase now. You have followed echoes through ruins, through skies, through layers of earth and memory. There is nothing left to solve tonight. Descent asks only that you stop climbing. The universe does not demand vigilance at all times. Stars burn regardless of observation. Rivers flow whether measured or not. Sleep is permission to let systems operate without supervision. Trust replaces effort. In my own nights beneath open skies, I learned that the most profound insights often arrive just as consciousness loosens, not fully asleep, not fully awake. In that threshold, rigid categories dissolve. Myth and science stop arguing. They coexist quietly. The Sumerians lived close to that threshold. Their stories drift easily between concrete detail and cosmic scale. They did not insist on waking clarity at all moments. They allowed mystery to remain active even during rest. Descent into sleep mirrors, descent into layers of earth. Surface noise fades, deeper patterns remain, heartbeat, breath, gravity. These are constants. They persist whether named or not. You're not falling traveller. You're being carried downward by rhythms designed long before your arrival. Circadian cycles, planetary rotation, orbital mechanics, all conspire gently to invite rest. The ancient builders aligned temples to the sky not to dominate it, but to synchronize with it. Sleep is a similar alignment, a daily recalibration between inner biology and outer cosmos. As the night deepens, thoughts become less linear. Images soften. The need for sequence dissolves. This is not loss of intelligence, it is intelligence entering maintenance mode. The Sumerians understood maintenance, they were caretakers of inherited systems. Sleep is how caretakers endure. Without it, stewardship collapses. You may feel the boundaries of the story loosening now. That is intentional. Descent does not hold edges tightly. It allows them to blur. Memory and imagination overlap. Past and present fold gently together. Somewhere beneath ancient cities, foundations rest in darkness untroubled by interpretation. Somewhere above, stars continue their paths without concern for meaning. Between them, you rest. Silence is the universe thinking, but it is also the universe resting. Not every moment is for signal. Some are for recovery. Breath slows, muscles release, the narrative no longer advances, it settles. This is not an ending, it is suspension. The Sumerians would have recognized this state. Night was sacred not because of fear, but because of surrender. The world continues without human effort for a few hours. That trust is essential. You do not need to hold the story anymore. It can remain unfinished. Some mysteries aren't meant to be solved, only observed, and some aren't even meant to be observed continuously. Descent teaches humility gently. It reminds the mind that control is intermittent, that rest is participation, not absence. As you drift, imagine the weight of the earth supporting you, the motion of the planet carrying you, the gravity of the sun holding the system together. None of this requires your attention to function. You are not lost in space. You are safely embedded within it, allowed to power down for a while. The Sumerians ended their days the same way all humans eventually do. By lying down beneath a sky that outlasts them. By trusting morning to return. Tonight the universe whispers again, but more quietly now. It no longer asks questions. It offers rest. Some mysteries wait. Others watch. And some fade gently into the background hum of existence as consciousness softens. It's all right to not understand. Understanding sleeps too. Let the descent continue without resistance. Let thought loosen its grip. Let images dissolve into darkness. Sleep, traveller. The cosmos will keep watch. The final moments of a story are rarely about answers. They are about release. Long after questions have been asked and patterns traced, there comes a point where holding on becomes unnecessary. The Sumerians seem to know this. Their records do not end with certainty. They end with continuity, with quiet acknowledgement that the world moves forward whether or not it is fully understood. I imagine the last tablet placed back onto a shelf in a temple archive, the scribe's task complete for the night. Oil lamps dim, footsteps fade, the building settles into stillness. Outside, the river continues its slow movement, carrying sediment from places unseen. Nothing dramatic marks the ending, life simply continues. Finality in this sense is not closure, it is acceptance. The acceptance that intelligence is always temporary, always local, always embedded within forces far larger than itself. The Sumerians wrote as if they understood they were not concluding a story, but adding a layer to one already impossibly old. In science, conclusions are provisional by design. A theory stands only until better data arrives. A model works only within defined limits. Final papers are published with the understanding that revision is inevitable. This humility mirrors the tone of ancient texts more than we often admit. The Sumerians did not declare themselves the culmination of history. They placed themselves after something greater and before something unknown. That positioning matters. It frames humanity not as destination, but as interval. As listener, you now occupy that same interval. You exist between deep past and uncertain future, carrying fragments of inherited knowledge surrounded by systems you did not design. This is not a burden. It is a condition shared by all who have ever lived. The final section of this journey is not meant to elevate or diminish you. It is meant to situate you, to remind you that awareness itself is enough. You do not need to solve the ancient world to belong within it. I have felt this clarity most strongly in moments of exhaustion, when the drive to explain finally gives way to simple observation, when stars are no longer data points, but lights, when ruins are no longer puzzles, but places. when silence stops feeling empty and starts feeling complete. The Sumerians lived with that balance. Their cities were loud by day or ordered by night. Their myths were expansive, their daily lives practical. They did not collapse, wonder into function, or function into wonder. They allowed both to exist. Finality, then, is balance restored. After speculation, rest. After inquiry, quiet. After dissent, stillness. You have travelled through epochs tonight, through beings remembered only in outline, through floods that reset landscapes and minds, through skies that hold memory longer than stone, through earth that remembers by forgetting, through return, reflection and dissent. Nothing more is required. The universe does not expect comprehension from every observer. It offers participation instead. Simply being here, breathing, listening is enough to fulfill your role. Somewhere beyond our reach, something ancient once wondered about its own ending. Perhaps it too lay beneath a sky and sensed that its time was passing. Perhaps it too accepted that continuity would take forms it could not anticipate. Final thoughts do not need to be heavy. They can be light like dust settling after disturbance, like water smoothing its surface once turbulence fades. As sleep deepens, memory loosens, details blur. What remains is impression rather than narrative. That is appropriate. Stories do not need to remain sharp to remain meaningful. The Sumerians left their sharpest edges in clay. What survived beyond that was tone, humility, awareness of scale, acceptance of loss without bitterness. These are not lessons to be applied urgently. They are understandings to be absorbed slowly, perhaps unconsciously, the way gravity shapes motion without instruction. You're not lost in space, traveller. You're held within a system that has carried countless forms of awareness before you and will carry others after. Your presence is brief, but not insignificant. Finality does not erase significance, it contextualizes it. As the mind drifts further, the boundary between story and silence dissolves. This is not disappearance, it is integration. The narrative settles into the background, becoming part of the larger hum of existence. Some mysteries wait, others watch, and some release their hold gently when no longer needed. Tonight the universe whispers again, but the words are no longer questions. They are reassurance, that not knowing is safe, that rest is allowed, that the cosmos does not require vigilance to remain intact. It's all right to not understand. Let the final images fade. Let thoughts slow to the pace of breath. Let awareness soften without fear. Sleep, traveller. The cosmos will keep watch. Nothing more needs to be carried forward now. Thought has done its work and can loosen its grip. What remains is presence, quiet and unremarkable, the kind that does not announce itself. The Sumerians understood this state as well. After the tablets were written, after the rituals completed, life did not wait for interpretation. It continued in silence. There is a point where curiosity becomes weightless. Questions still exist, but they no longer pull. They drift suspended like dust motes in low light. This is not forgetting. It is trust. Trust that understanding does not vanish when attention rests. It only changes form. I have felt this many times at the end of long nights, when data stops arranging itself into meaning and simply becomes pattern again. Stars blur into motion. Numbers lose urgency. The mind releases its need to hold the universe steady. That release is not failure, it is alignment. The Sumerians lived within that alignment more often than we do. Their myths did not demand constant resolution. Their gods argued, withdrew, returned, and sometimes remained silent. Silence was not absence, it was part of the structure, a necessary interval. As sleep deepens, the body follows ancient instructions written far earlier than language. Muscles soften. Breath finds its own rhythm. Awareness narrows without concern. These processes do not require belief. They operate whether named or not, the way gravity does. You are safe in this narrowing, listener. Nothing important is being lost. The story does not end because you stop listening to it. It continues without effort, folding back into the larger fabric from which it emerged. Somewhere beneath layers of earth foundations remain unmoved by time's passing. Somewhere above, stars trace arcs they have followed for millions of years. Between them you rest briefly, participating without obligation. This is enough. Let the remaining images dissolve gently. Let the echoes settle. Let memory become texture rather than narrative. There is no need to hold the beginning or anticipate what comes next. Sleep is not departure. It is return to a quieter form of awareness, one that does not demand answers. The universe does not go anywhere while you rest. It remains. We have reached the edge of tonight's journey, traveller, where questions soften and the ruins grow quiet again. Together we moved through clay tablets and drowned cities, through forgotten epochs and careful measurements left by hands long gone. Now the lantern light dims, not because the path ends, but because some paths are meant to fade gently into darkness. What remains is not an answer, but a feeling. A recognition that the past is unfinished, that time does not close its books neatly. Beneath sand and sediment, beneath memory itself, the universe keeps its archives intact. Silence is not emptiness. Silence is the universe thinking, holding what it is not yet ready to reveal. In science, we learn to accept limits. Instruments reach only so far. Evidence erodes. Signals weaken with distance. Yet wonder survives, even when certainty does not. Gravity still binds us to the ground, light still travels across unimaginable spans, and consciousness still pauses listening when it senses something older than itself. Perhaps that is our place in the vastness observer. Not as masters of the story, but as witnesses passing briefly through it. Small, fragile, yet capable of awe. Entropy carries everything forward, but memory resists in quiet ways, etched into stone, into orbit, into the long patience of stars. Some truths do not ask to be solved. They ask only to be held gently, without fear, without urgency. Tonight it is enough to have wondered. Rest now. Let the questions loosen their shape. Sleep, traveller. The cosmos will keep watch.